Hello everyone, welcome to Military Schedule, where we uncover untold stories of war. In today's video, we're diving deep into the stories of bravery, sacrifice, and tragedy of international soldiers who lost their lives fighting in Ukraine. Have you ever wondered who these unsung heroes are? We investigated and uncovered emotional and impactful accounts that never made the headlines. Get ready to meet the lives behind the numbers, understand their motivations, and discover how their stories shaped the course of the war. Stay with us until the end, because you won't want to miss these inspiring and moving stories that will change your perspective on the conflict. If you enjoy content that goes beyond the headlines, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss one of our videos. Now let's get started. Daniil Lashuk was born in Belarus, and at the age of 14, he moved to Crimea. He volunteered to fight for Ukraine after Russia occupied Crimea in 2014. He converted to Islam and posed with ISIS flags. Lashuk was nicknamed Mujahid, which means Holy Warrior. He joined the Tornado Battalion of Ukraine, a small paramilitary police unit that fought against pro-Russian separatists in Donbass. Daniil Lashuk was described as the most dangerous and cruel of all the members of the Tornado Battalion. The Tornado Battalion was disbanded in 2015, and Lashuk was sentenced to 10 years in prison by a Kiev court for various crimes, including torture and rape of POWs. Daniil Lashuk was released in early 2021 and returned to the front line after the start of the war. He founded and led the combat group Vendetta and was wounded twice. The Vendetta group defended Kiev and its suburbs and participated in battles in the Kharkiv and Mykolaiv regions, as well as in sabotage activities in the Kherson region. On April 1, 2023, Daniil Lashuk was killed in combat by Russian troops on the front line near Bakhmut. He was 27 years old. Catarina Shinkarenko, known as Katya, was born in Kramatorsk, Donetsk region, but lived with her family in the city of Ostro, in the Rivne region. Catarina was a professional cyclist and was married to Andriy Bozhko. Their son Denise is 7 years old. She was a social media star, and despite her fragile appearance, Catarina had unshakable courage. Catarina Shinkarenko joined the Ukrainian army and became a sniper. In the Ukrainian army, she was given the call sign Whiskey and was highly decorated, honored with the Order of Courage of Ukraine, the Golden Cross of the General Staff, and the Cross of Valor. Reports indicate that on February 22, 2024, during the Battle of Avdiivka, Catarina Shinkarenko chose to stay behind with her sniper platoon, tasked with covering the retreat of the 53rd Separate Mechanized Brigade of Ukraine, which abandoned the city. Katerina Whiskey Shinkarenko died alongside her fellow platoon members, fighting alone to the end against the advancing Russian troops that took the city. Her remains were left far behind enemy lines and were only recovered 2 months later through a body exchange. Katerina Shinkarenko was 30 years old and is considered the greatest heroine of Ukraine to date. Skyler James Gregg was a young man from Washington State who ran away from his father's home to fight in Ukraine. He slipped away from his father's house one April morning in 2022 and met up with his mother, who took him to the airport. Gregg, who had previously studied in Poland and had a friend in Ukraine, lacked military experience, a requirement to join the International Legion. He managed to enlist easily because he arrived at a time when the war was still in its early stages and there was a need for volunteers. After being wounded by a Russian explosive in the Kharkiv region, Gregg was sent to a hospital in Poltava to recover from 14 shrapnel wounds to his foot, arm, and shoulder. Despite his injuries, in June 2022, Gregg was cleared to return to the front lines. And although he understood why some people might think he had made a hasty decision, he did not regret signing up. In the last week of October 2022, while serving in the International Legion, Skyler James Gregg was killed by Russian artillery fire in the northeastern part of the country. He was 23 years old. Jeffrey Jud Jones had a tough childhood when his biological father abandoned him and his mother when he was just 6 months old. Later, his mother was hospitalized for psychiatric issues, and Jeffrey was sent to an orphanage, being adopted by a family at the age of 10. Jeffrey Jones enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1993 and served in the 101st Airborne Division before being honorably discharged the following year after sustaining injuries. When the war began, Jeffrey Jones went to Poland to work with humanitarian groups to help Ukrainian refugees. His group also helped train new recruits in the Ukrainian armed forces. A Russian artillery attack caused a concrete wall to collapse on him, but he was saved by his helmet. He returned to the United States in July 2022, but always said he would go back. He went back to Ukraine in April 2023 and joined a group of foreign fighters, most of whom were from South America. He was the oldest in the small group of 48 fighters and was called Grandpa. He took special care of the younger and inexperienced fighters, saying that if someone had to die, it should be him. On July 31st, 2023, Jeffrey Jones's unit was trying to retake a trench taken by the Russians in Bakhmut when he tried to protect a young Brazilian fighter, but both were killed by a mortar. Kyle Ronald Porter was born and raised in Calgary, Canada, where he attended the local elementary school and enjoyed hiking outdoors, biking, and snowboarding. He was also a scout. At 21, he obtained his EMT certification and became a qualified medical technician in the reserves. At 22, he joined the regular army and was posted to the 12th Detachment of Canadian Forces Health Services in Wainwright, Alberta. In May 2021, he left the army and went to South Africa, where he worked in anti-poaching efforts. When the war started, he decided to go to Ukraine, where he served twice as a search and rescue technician in a non-profit humanitarian organization, recovering injured and deceased civilians. Kyle Porter also served in Charlie 3, 1st Infantry Battalion of the Ukrainian International Legion. Finally, he joined the 92nd Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Ground Forces and had been involved in combat since December 2022. Kyle was a combat medic in the Special Services Group of the Ukrainian Legionnaires. On April 26, 2023, Kyle Porter was trying to rescue his friend and fellow Canadian volunteer, Cole Bear Zelenko, when he was hit by Russian artillery shells in Bakhmut. Both friends lost their lives in the attack. Kyle Porter was 27 years old and was also a co-founder of Fire Force Ventures. Mola Rachok was a Ukrainian philologist and journalist who loved poetry. Mola had many dreams and interests. He played the piano, studied foreign languages, and enjoyed dancing. In 2017, Mola Rachok took charge of the news department at Ukraine's largest automotive portal, Infocar. In the early days of the large-scale war, Mola enlisted in the Ukrainian army and was assigned to the 58th Motorized Infantry Brigade. He had no combat experience, but his family knew he never wavered in his decision. Not for a moment did Mola doubt that his place was alongside the defenders who held their positions under bombardment and in trenches flooded with blood. According to his brothers-in-arms, Mola was a true warrior, and he deliberately entered into battles. He returned to the front line even after being granted longer leave, following a tough few weeks in the Luhansk region. On July 19, 2022, in a bloody battle near the village of Pokrovsky in the Donetsk region, Mola Rachok was killed in combat by troops from the Wagner Group, which included a large detachment. He was 27 years old. Natalia Frer was a Ukrainian who lived in Austria before the war. She worked as a dentist before leaving the city of Innsbruck to join the volunteer medical battalion Hospitalers in April 2022. This volunteer paramedical organization was founded by Yana Zinkovich. In 2014, Natalia Frer had already worked as a combat medic in Donbass, where she saved many lives. While still in Austria, she sent aid to Ukraine in the form of humanitarian and medical supplies and protective equipment for the military. She financially supported refugees in Ukraine and Austria, and also cared for children from Ukrainian orphanages in Tyrol, Austria. The war in her homeland, Ukraine, hurt her so much that she could not limit herself to volunteering and decided to go to the front, where she worked as a combat medic to save injured soldiers. In July 2022, the evacuation bus she was in with other rescue teams collided with a military vehicle during the night while transporting the wounded. The medic suffered serious injuries and died despite the efforts of her colleagues. They bid farewell to the heroine for the last time in Kiev. Natalia Frer was 47 years old and left behind a 25-year-old daughter. Nicholas Dwayne Mamer participated in ROTC during his freshman and senior years at Bora High School, graduating in 1996. After high school, Nick served in the U.S. Army and retired in 2018, after 20 years of service, part of which he spent in the elite special forces, known as the Green Berets. As a civilian, Nick initially worked in the IT sector, but in 2022 he moved to Spain to teach English. When the war in Ukraine began, he felt compelled to help the Ukrainians defend democracy in their country and moved to Kyiv. In Ukraine, he trained civilian volunteers, mainly on the most effective ways to evacuate civilians. On May 14, 2023, Nick Mamer was in the midst of fierce combat against mercenaries from the Wagner Group in the city of Bakhmut. He was behind enemy lines and attempting to retreat when he was killed by an artillery shell fired by Russian mercenaries that hit the building where he was positioned. He was 45 years old. Petri Viljakainen, who lived in Pieksämäki, Finland, volunteered as a fighter in the ranks of the pro-Russian separatists in Donbass during the summer of 2015. At the time, he was 38 years old, unemployed, and barely knew Russian. Petri Viljakainen was in search of a purpose for his life. The Finnish fighter who sided with Russia often stated that it takes a lot of work to earn a salary in civilian life. For 7 years, he served in the units of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Army. According to his commander at the time, Vili, as he was known, was a very good and positive man, and before the onset of the Ukraine war in February 2022, he was in combat positions. When the Ukrainian civil war intensified in February 2022 and the army of the Luhansk People's Republic launched a counterattack with Russian support, Vili, who served in the 1st Motor Rifle Battalion, was on the front line. Vili acted as a universal soldier, able to operate machine guns, serve as a sniper, and also operate as a grenadier. He was also wounded in combat 3 times. According to reports, Petri Viljakainen was killed in March 2022 in a forest near Severodonetsk by Ukrainian troops. He refused to surrender and died weapon in hand, alongside his unit comrades. His remains were never found. Russland Serov, known by his call sign David, is a Ukrainian from Mykolaiv. He studied law in Kharkiv, but his calling was the war for Ukraine's independence, bravely defending his country from the first day of the war. In 2017, he joined the Azov Regiment, and on the first day of 2022, he began defending the region of Kyiv. On April 5, 2022, Russland David flew by helicopter to the city of Mariupol, which was surrounded by Russian forces. It was a one-way trip, as about 80% of the soldiers who went did not return. But for him, it was a matter of honor. His wife, Lyubov, feared that her husband would not reach Mariupol, but she did not try to discourage him. Russland David was at the Azovstal steelworks and had just rescued a wounded soldier when he heard a whistle, and as he turned, he saw an anti-tank missile slice through his leg as a knife cuts through a sausage. In desperation, he screamed for someone to shoot him, but a friend refused and rescued him. Russland David was captured by the Russians in that state, where he remained until April 29, 2022, and when he was exchanged, there was no chance he would survive. But Russland David did not give up. He underwent rehabilitation and wrote his own book, Mariupol, the Book of the Brave. In Russland David's words, "Unfortunately, fallen heroes cannot be brought back, but it is our duty to know them and respect them." Paul Lee Kim was born in Houston, Texas, and always wanted to be a soldier. He wanted to fight for those who couldn't defend themselves. Paul Lee Kim served in the U.S. Army for 12 years, becoming an infantry officer with the rank of captain. He also served in the 82nd Airborne Division in Iraq from February 2013 to July 2015, before leaving the Army in 2017 for medical reasons. Captain Paul Lee Kim taught military sciences to ROTC students at the University of Texas at Arlington. When the war in Ukraine began, Paul told his family and friends that he felt called to join the International Legion of Ukraine. On October 5, 2022, Captain Paul Lee Kim's unit captured 12 soldiers from the 150th MSD of the Russian Armed Forces. His team continued fighting against Russian troops using artillery and armored combat vehicles, including T-90M tanks. Russian troops fired their tanks where Paul and his unit were located. Captain Paul Lee Kim died heroically with his weapon in hand, in combat in the city of Mykolaiv, 2 days before his 35th birthday. He was a Catholic and donated 100% of the money he earned while serving in Ukraine. Clayton Hightower grew up in Kamaya, Idaho, and joined the U.S. Army in 2014, following in the footsteps of his brothers who served in different branches of the U.S. Armed Forces. In 2017, after nearly 4 years in the Army, Clayton Hightower was medically discharged with a permanent disability. Despite multiple rejected attempts to revoke his disability status, he never lost his motivation to help others. In March 2022, Clayton Hightower went to Ukraine and joined the International Foreign Legion to fulfill his purpose of helping the Ukrainian people. His service in Ukraine went beyond combat as he learned the local languages, kept morale high, and made sure stray cats received some love as well. In addition to his optimistic attitude and determination, Hightower was also known for his artillery knowledge and unpredictable war tactics. Russian troops nicknamed Clayton Hightower the Muddy One because he used an unusual camouflage technique, staying covered in mud and waiting for the right moment to strike. On December 4th, 2022, Clayton Hightower was killed in combat against Russian troops while holding a position at an observation post in Kupiansk. Before he died, Hightower saved the life of a French soldier by performing CPR, even under heavy enemy fire. He was 30 years old. Brad Stratford was a native of North Vancouver, Canada, and a veteran of the Canadian Army. Brad Stratford arrived in Ukraine in the spring of 2022, shortly after the war began, and joined the International Legion, where he spent much of his time training new marksmen. He was one of the older legionnaires, but he was in as good shape as the younger ones. He was described as a high-level sniper instructor. All his brothers-in-arms loved and respected him and considered him an exceptional soldier, a great friend, and a true leader. During the Battle of Avdiivka, the Russians counterattacked in several locations where the fighting was already intense. These new waves of Russian attacks made the combat conditions increasingly harsh, and the foreign fighters were assigned to dangerous and intense missions, which unfortunately led to losses. Brad Stratford, also known as Switchback, had recently completed a period at sniper school and was on one of these intense combat missions in Avdiivka. In November 2023, Brad Switchback Stratford died in combat against Russian troops in the city of Avdiivka. He was 50 years old. Daniel Nstrom traveled to Ukraine in April 2022. He was one of several Swedish volunteer soldiers who made the difficult choice to join the International Legion and the Ukrainian Army. He was inspired by 3 Ukrainian friends who traveled to work in Skellefteå, where he lived before his trip to Ukraine. Before leaving, he told his mother, "It has always been my dream to do something in military service, so it was an obvious calling for me." Daniel Nstrom participated in several military operations during his time in the war. He was in battles on the Donetsk front, and during the offensive against Kherson, when tens of thousands of Russian soldiers were forced to retreat. Daniel Nstrom was tired and eager for a short break and wanted to return home to Sweden. The problem was that he had left his volunteer status and had signed a contract, so he couldn't just leave. On May 24, 2023, Daniel Nstrom was found dead in an apartment in Kyiv. He was 36 years old, and the cause of his death remains a mystery to this day. Aliaksei Skoblya was born in Minsk, then part of the Soviet Union, on March 14, 1990. In 2015, Skoblya went to Ukraine and joined the Ukrainian Armed Forces, where he served as a soldier and was given the war name Tur. He was a key member of the Belarusian opposition fighting for Ukraine in the war in Donbass. Between 2021 and 2022, he served in Ukraine's Special Operations Forces under contract. When the war began, Aliaksei Skoblya became the deputy commander of the newly formed Kastus Kalinowski Battalion of Belarusian volunteers. On March 13, 2022, his unit was ambushed by Russian troops on the outskirts of Kyiv. Aliaksei Skoblya died in combat while covering the retreat of his troops. In the week before his death, he had rescued 10 wounded soldiers from his battalion. On April 13, 2022, the President of Ukraine posthumously awarded Aliaksei Skoblya the title of Hero of Ukraine for his heroism during the Battle of Kyiv. Jericho Sky McGallen grew up in Las Vegas and had a passion for military service since childhood. At 17, his father gave consent for Jericho to enlist in the Army. Jericho became a military police officer stationed at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and eventually served in the Nevada Army National Guard. He served in the 137th Military Police Detachment and left that unit in 2016. Jericho McGallen departed for Ukraine for the first time on March 5, 2022, just 9 days after the war began. He joined the International Legion to fight as a volunteer and was first deployed to the front line on March 9, 2022. Jericho served as a squad leader with volunteers from Canada, England, Spain, Germany, and the Netherlands, considering them all brothers. Jericho always volunteered for the most dangerous missions, knowing he was putting his life at risk and without any fear or regard for himself, always marching into enemy territory. He fought alongside the Ukrainians for 10 months, from March 2022 to December 2022. At the end of August 2023, after returning to Ukraine to assist with training away from the front line, he was called upon to help with an operation. On September 5, 2023, during a rescue operation on the front line, Jericho McGallen was killed in action in the city of Bakhmut, along with 19 other volunteers who fought against the Russians. He was 28 years old and left behind one child. Aiden Aslin, known as Cossack Gundi on social media, is a British citizen born on January 7, 1994, who worked as a caregiver in civilian life. In 2015, he traveled to Syrian Kurdistan, where he joined the People's Protection Units, known as YPG. In 2018, Aiden Aslin traveled to Ukraine and enlisted in the 36th Ukrainian Marine Brigade. In February 2022, he was deployed to Mariupol, and at that time, he was an experienced Ukrainian Marine. On April 12, 2022, he fought bravely to defend his adopted homeland, but a shortage of supplies forced his unit to surrender to Russian troops, who had been besieging Mariupol since February 24, 2022. While in captivity, images of Aiden Aslin were broadcast on Russian state television, showing the Briton appearing to have suffered several injuries. In prison, he was forced to learn and sing the Russian national anthem. If he made a mistake, he would be beaten, possibly to death. On June 9, 2022, the Supreme Court of the Donetsk People's Republic found Aiden Aslin and 2 other Britons guilty and sentenced them to death. But on September 21, 2022, the Britons were released through a prisoner exchange mediated by Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.